Welcome to Way Over Our Heads. It's a podcast about climate and weather. I'm Jim Dubois. With me is Kenny Blumenfeld. He's a climatologist and all-around weather enthusiast. A happy man today because what is that strange glowing orb, that stellar object that is shining upon us today? We haven't seen it for, it seems like a couple of months.
Is that the human spirit? I can't tell. I don't
in
know
this
what
holiday
that is.
season, it probably is, yes.
Yeah, so we're in Minnesota, right?
Right.
And do listeners know or care, but we're outside.
Yeah, here we are.
It's a nice day.
It's a beautiful day.
Usually in the wintertime, we're probably going to be recording inside, but hey, it's warm, it's sunny. We're in a really tame weather pattern right now, so we're out here today, and the sunshine is something that I think you can see people walking along the parkway and they're kind of confused because, I mean, when was the last time you had 2.5 days of sun?
It's been, do we have to go back to October?
I think, we did have a very small stretch of sunny days in October, but really the concerted sunny period, we'd have to go back into September.
Wow.
And we really switched seasons. We switched from a warm and very wet condition. At the end of September, we kind of flipped and transitioned pretty quickly into cooler, cloudy, and actually pretty dry. And we had been hearing a lot of complaints. Those of us in the climate and weather community, where's the sun? It was making people pretty unhappy. And as you know, we're approaching the time of year where the sun is at its, quote, weakest, meaning
Right.
It's at the lowest angle in the sky that we get. So it's got a pretty limited amount of intensity, and plus it's not out. It's only out for 9 hours total. And a lot of that's at a pretty slanted angle. So you're already deprived of light, and then if you cover that deprived light with clouds, that bums people out.
Absolutely. Yeah, the seasonal affective disorder is already there, and combine that with a lack of sun during the limited daytime hours of this time of the year. It's kind of a depressing scenario.
Yeah, and we didn't also have, there wasn't that much snow on the ground during that period. So it didn't give a lot of people a reason to be outside. And if you can't be outside, then you start questioning other bigger things in life, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, it's a beautiful day today, but to your point and what we talked about last time is this weather's kind of boring. I mean, it's pleasant, it's nice, it's sunny, it's warm today, at least comparatively warm, but not much really happening, is there, on the weather horizon?
Not a whole lot. No, we are in that traditional El Nino pattern. Now, we can't say for sure that the weather we're having today or this week is exactly because of El Nino, because really the atmosphere is more complicated than that. But this is a pattern that we often see during El Ninos, and they do tend to leave us with predominantly dull weather. And the reason is there's two main jet streams in the northern hemisphere. One kind of circles around the Arctic region, and we call that the polar jet. Some will call it the Arctic jet, but it's actually associated with the coldest air during winter. And so on the north side of that jet stream, you find the really cold air. And on the south side, it can be sort of mild. And then there's a southern jet stream that's called the subtropical jet. And this is actually usually well south of the U.S.-Mexico border and kind of encircles the world basically in the tropics. And during an El Nino, that Arctic or polar jet stream moves north of our region, leaving us in somewhat mild air. And then that subtropical jet inches into the southern part of the United States. You would think, oh, well, that makes us closer to the energy. But actually what it does is it sort of concentrates all of the interesting stuff. All of the moisture and the storm tracks get concentrated to the southern tier of states, especially Texas, Oklahoma, into the southeast U.S. And they've already been bombarded the last week or so with pretty wintry weather. We're kind of left with nothing. At least this time we have clear skies. We've had these same sort of flow conditions set up where it's just cloudy for 2.5 weeks straight. And it's kind of what we had for the first part of this month. So I think the good news is we've got sinking air. Sinking air is marvelous at clearing out the skies because you actually need rising air to produce clouds. So sinking air will clear the skies out, but it leaves for pretty benign weather. I'm not going to complain about that, but I think what some people might complain about, Jim, is that over the next several days, we're probably going to melt the majority of snow on the ground. And I think even if the airport officially observes 1-inch snow depth, and they could round up to do that, then it would officially go down as a white Christmas. But I'm not sure if that's going to count for most people. It's going to be a pretty threadbare snowpack, a pretty threadbare 1 inch of snow, and I don't see any prospects for replenishing that over the next week.
So you're saying don't count on a white Christmas?
Yeah, I think we talked about it last time, grayish, brownish. If we do get snow, it would definitely be a bonus. I just don't see any real good candidates coming in the next week. And of course, one of the things we have to remember too is all you need is a good inch or snow to kind of refresh the landscape. And a lot of times the systems that could produce an inch of snow, they're so small and insignificant that you don't see them very well until they're just a few days away. So maybe there's something that we're not seeing yet, but we don't have any evidence of it. You'd actually have to get in that week between Christmas and New Year's before we start to see a possible pattern change. And it would not be a major pattern change. It would basically be bring the temperatures down a bit, change the flow so that we're closer to the jet stream, and make it a little bit more active. We still don't see any strong signs of polar intrusions, Arctic air masses coming up anytime in the next few weeks. It looks like a warm next few weeks or so, relative to what we expect this time of year.
Well, here at our undisclosed location outside in South Minneapolis, you may be able to hear the water dripping down the downspouts. We're watching the snowpack go away. As Kenny said, the National Weather Service may at least officially be able to claim 1 inch of snow cover on Christmas. But Kenny, as the snowpack diminishes, and let's just say we lose most of it by Christmas time, what happens to the temperatures? Doesn't that help the temperatures be a little higher than they might be because there's not as much light reflecting off the snow?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Jim. We do get a feedback from what we call the albedo of the snow, the sunlight reflecting off of the snow. And a very fresh, bright, new snowpack tends to be highly reflective and have a very high albedo. And so the sunlight cannot be absorbed, and it actually therefore gets not as warm as it would be if there were no snow on the ground. But when you start to melt snow, its density changes, its thickness changes, so the amount of sunlight that can actually pass through it begins to increase, and that sunlight then gets absorbed a bit by the ground, and that also helps melt the snow. So the difference between having, say, 1 inch of snow on the ground and no snow isn't as profound as you might think. The much bigger difference is if you've got 8 inches or 6 inches even of snow on the ground versus, 1 or none. But yeah, having no snow on the landscape definitely allows the sunlight to be absorbed by the land, and that can warm you up a bit. There have been studies showing that the difference in a really cold air mass with and without snow cover can be 15 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. So imagine a really cold morning with a deep snowpack, you might hit 15, 20 below. Same air mass without a snowpack, you might be right around 0. So that is a big difference.
Well, now that our weather is warming up a bit, it does compel people to go outside, do more outdoor activities. But last night, looking out at Lake Harriet, saw some ice fisher people out there. One of them looked like they actually had an ice house out. And I know we can't, say anything definitively here, but it would appear that you're kind of taking things into your own hands from a risk standpoint if you're out on the ice when we're seeing temperatures consistently above 0, at least during the daytime.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And one of the things we don't know is how thick the ice is. I mean, we can sort of speculate. There's a lot of things that play into it. Not having a big snowpack actually does help the formation of ice. And we were cold enough in late November and early December that we built a pretty good ice pack on a lot of those lakes. But you're right, we've been spending more and more time above freezing. And we've actually seen it in past winters where even if you have a really cold early winter, you could still open up the water with a decent thaw in January. And then it'll, refreeze once you get another cold front. So it's always, good to check with local officials and see what they're saying. I kind of take the position that ice is inherently not safe. There's water underneath it. And if you are going to venture out, just be smart. Make sure you've checked with others, especially outside of the Twin Cities. It's often people are at bait shops and little sporting goods shops where, people who do ice fish will come in and get certain supplies. They often know the conditions pretty well. But yeah, it's especially the more prolonged this kind of thaw becomes, the more concern there is over ice safety, especially since it's a relatively immature ice pack. We just built it in the last couple weeks. So
if you do venture out on the ice, probably not a bad thing to have those, what are those, ice owls? Not owls in the sense of the ones that fly around and hoot, but the owls, AWLS, that can help at least stabilize you if you fall through the ice or pull yourself back on more solid ice. That seems like it could be a pretty wise thing to pack with you.
yeah, I'd say just in general, have a real good plan B. If something goes wrong, I better know what to do. If you haven't thought through ice safety, then you probably shouldn't be out on the ice.
Well, last week we talked about the top 5 weather events, or maybe not exactly the top 5, but 5 memorable weather events.
5 signature weather events.
Yes. We did get some feedback on social media, and one person said, well, surely you can't leave out the blizzard of Halloween 1991. Is this getting back to what we talked about before, Kenny? Because people are going to remember the events that happened in their lifetime.
Yeah.
And we talked about stuff that I don't think too many, at least one of them, I don't think there's a living soul on earth who remembers that one.
Yeah, I agree with the listener that the Halloween blizzard is a top event. However, that list, we kind of picked one from each category, basically, and I would put the Armistice Day blizzard in terms of impact up against the Halloween blizzard, if only because the Halloween blizzard was a decent surprise. I remember it very well. It was a lot larger than most people expected, and it had produced huge amounts of snow. But the Armistice Day blizzard was more dangerous. Those were deadly conditions, and especially given the technology that we didn't have at the time, and in terms of forecasting and understanding what was coming. The Halloween blizzard certainly turned into a pretty deadly event, but by the time it became that way, by the time it was a true blizzard, most of the snow had fallen and most of the people had sort of gotten the memo. So I agree, it was definitely a very impressive event, and it's always hard to choose what you're going to put on a list like that. And let's remember, these are arbitrary. Certainly in my lifetime, that's one of the major memorable events. But I think historically, I would defer to the Armistice Day blizzard. It killed a lot of people, and it shut down the state in a way that the Halloween blizzard simply did not.
Well, Kenny, when we chat again next week, we'll kind of wrap up the year, talk about some of the year's weather events, and talk about what's currently in the news from a weather and climate standpoint as well.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, there's a lot. 2018 was actually a pretty wild year, even in Minnesota. You know, we live in a variable climate, so we got a lot. We got a lot to talk about, but even if we step back a little bit and look at what happened nationally, there's a couple stories we might touch on there too.
Well, Kenny, we'll chat next week, and that will be the final opportunity, I think, for you to speculate on whether or not we will indeed have a white Christmas.
Yeah, indeed. All right, thanks, Jim.
Kenny, great talking to you, and we'll see you next week.
Good talking to you.